Hey everyone, it's Andrig with Andrig's Aircooled technology. Just wanted to give a quick update on what's happening with the Evolution 1 or the original lightweight cooling fan. um, they shipped the mounts for the fan as of today, so I'm good there. There was a delay in the actual production of the fans. Um, there was a mistake in the model for the change that we're making to the mold. That's been, it was caught unfortunately a little too late. So um, so that is taking longer than expected. The mold should be done on the 17th of this month of January. So and then samples will ship, and then I'll validate the samples, and then we'll do a bigger manufacturing run. Of course, those samples, if they're fine, those will just be just like production. So I'll ship those as well. So so that's coming. Just wanted to give an update on that. The pre-orders have gone really well since I opened it up for pre-orders. Those pre-orders will just continue, so you'll get the discounted price even if you order with the fan shroud, the whole Evolution 1 cooling system. You'll get the discounted price until I have inventory. So that'll just continue. But we look like we're gonna start shipping in that third week of January, and it'll probably bleed over for everyone because there's been a lot of pre-orders into February. But hopefully we'll get this done as quickly as possible. And I'm sorry about the mistake in the model. Don't even really know how it happened. I but regardless of that, these things happen sometimes, and so the mold is being machined yet again, and it'll be ready to go, like I said, on the 17th, and we'll do production as quickly as possible. I do have an update too on Evolution 2 fans. So one of the things that I said in the last time, and I showed it, is a hybrid approach, a steel fan and with some 3D printed components. When I went through kind of the assembly process of the first couple of prototypes, it was really difficult. And part of the difficulty was I did find a mistake in one of the parts, which is fine. It was a small mistake, but it made it more difficult to assemble. But even with that, what I kind of realized after doing that, in the parts that didn't have the mistake, it still took a significant amount of time for assembly. And I started to do the math on that time. And if I'm having anybody, I mean, my time, you could consider my time for free, but I don't have unlimited amount of time. So if it takes a long time, it takes a long time. I build that into my pricing model, because if I had to pay somebody to do it, it'll take the same amount of time that it takes me to do it. So regardless of that, it didn't look like it was going to be very viable from a price point perspective. And there was unknowns in terms of the assembly process and would it hold together and all that. And so I started really thinking hard about what are additional alternatives to it. And I'm like, well, the straight radial blade design of what I'm now calling Evolution 1 fans, it worked great. And in working as well as it worked, it also was highly reliable. So in terms of customer experience out there, and I've mentioned this before, is I think the first couple that I sold, they cracked. But it was really due to how they were mounted, and I was using, at the time I was depending on the stock mount, which really wasn't designed for this fan. So I designed my own mount. I sent those out to customers. I think I ended up giving almost 250 of those away for free, and then incorporated it into the product. And of course, the product price went up a little bit to account for those mounts. So since those new mounts that I designed, that were really designed for the fan to mount it appropriately, and none of them have ever failed. So so with the reliability, that's what I'm after, right? Is the reliability, is solving that problem and giving you the great performance of the fan. So and the performance was amazing. It was really good. So with that, I started to think, well, if I can design a dual-sided centrifugal, squirrel cage centrifugal fan, I should be able to design a dual-sided straight radial blade fan. It was just trickier from a CAD modeling perspective, even though it wouldn't seem like it is, but it was. But I did it, and I've created a prototype. I'm going to show you right here. This is just printed in PLA, so it was just for both fitment testing, make sure it fits in the fan shroud, and for airflow testing. Because if I test kind of a crude print like this, the production thing is only going to be a little bit better. So, in fact, all of my test results were always on a fairly crude print, knowing that production versions would actually be better. But I don't even advertise. I do redo the testing, but I don't really advertise the higher numbers. I just keep things conservative. So this is what that looks like, and this backing plate combination and inlet is the same one from the squirrel cage design that I ended up with all of the kind of enhancements of what I learned in that process of sending this out to customers. And in fact, I got this assembled on this particular alternator for this video for a reason. This was one of the most troublesome alternators out in the market. This is a Cooltech alternator, and it's the diameter of it is very, very small compared to Bosch and really everybody else for the most part. It's actually kind of smaller, like most of the generators are smaller. Although I did find out that even some of the generators are larger, right? So this varies so much, and I had original design. This was like sat in a cup that needed to be kind of tightly sitting there. With all the different, variations on the diameter of this, that became a problem. So I had changed the design so that it wasn't no longer dependent on the diameter of the alternator or generator. So it just bolts onto the back end, like you can see here, and it doesn't matter what this diameter is, big, small, doesn't matter. So that helps a tremendous amount. And I've improved the way that it bolts together and the thickness of these materials right here, so that these ears were sometimes cracking or whatever. That problem is really solved with this design. So this is a design I was already shipping with the products, just on things that we learned, and so we're maintaining that. But I'm also switching to a different material. I'm going to show you a production version of it. This is the production version. So this is a different material than what I was producing them at. It's a more expensive material. It's more than twice as expensive as the original material. But having said that, this material, it's not really stronger per se, but what it is it's more ductile. So it can flex. A lot of these fan shrouds and stuff that people have, sometimes they're a little warped. You never know what people do. Like I had one guy, he had welded a bunch on his fan shroud, and it was warped, and then it caused some of the stuff to crack because he was bending it, on this warped sheet metal. This one should be more tolerant of those kind of things because it is more ductile. It's plenty strong. In fact, it actually is, I think, stronger material, just generally speaking. But the fact that it will flex more without cracking or breaking is the real kind of advantage to this. And I've made some improvements on how I print. Surface finish is even better. So so that actually helps with the airflow as well. And so that's what the new ones will look like, is this. And of course there will be a different one for generators versus alternators. Generators are a lot heavier than alternators are. So generator ones have beefed up supports here, so that they're much larger than I shouldn't say much larger. They're larger, just because the generators are so much heavier. So with that, you can see kind of progress we've made there. And I did airflow testing on this, and the results were even better than the results I got on the squirrel cage design, which I kind of thought it might, but I didn't really have an inkling that it would be as much better as it is. So that is something that's in development. I'm at the point now where, because this is actually mounted on this alternator with a stock mount, which is fine for airflow testing, whatever. There's not a lot of stress on these parts, and of course there's regular PLA plastic, etc. And so I've got to do one kind of fitment test with the actual production mounts that are coming, which I should get on Wednesday of next week. And once I've done that, then the next step of the process is getting quotes for a production mold for this thing, and then going through that process of having the mold made, making some samples off of that mold, getting those samples, testing those samples to make sure everything still fits right, etc. And it fits in the mount correctly, and all of that. So that process last time with the original lightweight cooling fan, which I'm now calling the Evolution 1, and this will be called the Evolution 2, 1 inlet versus 2 air inlets, will take some time. So it took 5 iterations last time to get all the dimensions right, because when you injection mold something and it comes out of the mold, it's not perfectly the size of the mold. So no matter how tight the tolerances are in the mold, etc., it's never going to be perfect, because the material will then shrink some, etc. Usually, almost always, the material is going to shrink a little bit. So how it shrinks, where it shrinks, those are like, there is, I think, software that kind of like can kind of predict, that kind of stuff. But it's very difficult to predict. And the thing that the engineers on the first go around when I did the Evolution 1 cooling fan, where they told me they thought it was going to shrink a lot, it didn't shrink really at all. In fact, on our 5th iteration, the one that got right, I ended up actually with the exact same dimensions of the original model in the part they thought was going to shrink. It didn't shrink at all. It basically came out exactly as designed. But it was a different area that shrunk. And so it's very difficult to predict exactly, how it's going to shrink. And so that takes an iterative process. And each iteration requires machining of the mold, right? So, so you want to start certain features that you think are going to shrink to be a somewhat larger size than they really need to be. So when they shrink, that you'll end up, being able to, machine the thing, larger, sometimes smaller, depends on the feature and whether you're talking about outside or inside diameters. So, measurements. So, not necessarily just diameters, but so sometimes they need to be smaller, sometimes they need to be bigger, etc. And then they have to machine the mold again, do another sample, etc. So, like I said before, it took 5 iterations on the first go around, and it would have actually. The funny thing about it is it would have actually been fine on the very first iteration if we just left the model completely as it was from the beginning that I 3D printed. So on this next go around, I kind of know the lesson of that particular area of this part. So we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna make that bigger. We just leave it the way it is. And then on the area that I know shrunk quite a bit, on this one, because of the geometry is quite a bit different in that particular area. My gut is telling me it's not going to shrink nearly as much. But anyway, we'll find out when we do the mold and we get the first samples. So this probably is going to, take until July, I think, at the earliest of, this year, 2025. So, so it's going to be a while. But in the meantime, the Evolution 1 cooling fan, the velocity rings, the Evolution fan shroud, that all stuff just, works extremely well. And it'll all be highly reliable, so you've got good stuff to choose from. Just have something even better coming. One thing that is kind of a little bit of a drawback of doing this versus 3D printing. I was supporting the early VW fan shrouds, that won't fit a doghouse fan shroud with those fans. And I did get quite a bit of orders for the early fan shroud, which surprised me. These will only be for doghouse fan shrouds. And the reason for that is simple. Molds are expensive. And having a mold just for the early fan shrouds versus for the late fan shrouds is, tens of thousands of dollars in additional cost with not nearly as much demand, right? So the cost of those fans would become, I would really have to increase, probably double the cost of the fans based on the sales rate that I was getting before in order to justify a mold. So that means if you got an early fan shroud and you want to run, one of these things, you won't be able to do it. It would be possible with some surgery to make the clearance necessary, but you'd have to be a super skilled sheet metal worker and working kind of, inside the fan shroud. Fairly difficult. I think it's possible, but I would not recommend doing it. And I'm no fan of the aftermarket fan shrouds other than my own, of course. So, because they have so many dimensional problems with them, they just don't fit that well. So, but we're going to be limited to doghouse only, and later. But of course, the doghouse fan shroud will fit on early motors, right? So, what I've discovered through all of my work is that the outer dimensions of the fan shroud really have never changed that I can tell from the earliest 36 horsepower. In fact, I had a guy do some measurements for me, and they were exactly the same as the late model stuff. So, and I have an early fan shroud. It's just not. It's not an early, no fresh air heat version. It's the the internals were the same, but obviously the fresh air heat and stuff, it changed that. So that was with 40 horsepower and later. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are with everything, and things are progressing quickly. And the velocity, like I said, the velocity rings, fan shrouds are all available, and of course the full complete cooling system with the Evolution 1 fan and the fan shroud. That's also available pre-order with the same $30 discount. So really appreciate all the pre-orders. It's been great, really helpful in terms of kind of keeping things afloat while we go through this process of mold modifications and producing product again. And then hopefully following that fairly as quick as we can, we'll see these, which the results were really spectacular. So I think you guys will really like this version of this and as well. So it just depends, kind of mild engine, wild engine, what you need in terms of cooling capacity. But without having done the testing, I think we'll be able to go all the way from about 8 or 9% airflow improvement with the Evolution 1 fan and no velocity ring, all the way up to probably 100% increase in airflow when we have the Evolution 2 fan and my fan shroud. Because my fan shroud, even with an OEM fan, produces a little over 52% more airflow. Of course, I have velocity rings for that fan shroud now as well. And with that and with this fan that I'm sitting here with here, I think we're going to be pretty close to a 100% increase in airflow. So pretty much any engine, from a stock engine that's in a hot climate that needs just a little bit more, to the most wild engine you can drive around on the street, or even a race, any kind of race car with any amount of horsepower, we'll be able to keep it cool. And I think that's where I've kind of been after for a long time, and it feels really good to get this going, get the results I got in testing, and kind of know that we'll have a real good range of cooling system enhancement products. One last little tidbit. I have been working also on velocity stacks. velocity rings and velocity stacks are about the same thing. So this is an IDF one. This is one for a 34 PIACT3 carburetor. Probably work with like the dual Soluxes, etc. Those are things that I'm kind of curious about. I do have a version of this integrated into an air cleaner setup as well. It's kind of out of view over here. Let me go grab that just so you kind of see what I'm talking about. So here, that's a standard, air cleaner that is usually used on throttle bodies or two-barrel carburetors like IDF carburetors or IDAs. Well, IDFs mostly. The IDAs are wider, and so you can see in there you got an integrated velocity stack, and you got your air filter can go on there, your top fitting on there. Come on, get it on there. It's always a little tricky. It's always a little. These air filters are always a little funky. There we go. Always a little funky. And of course, I'll probably do these in black, not in this red. But I was playing around with red for velocity stacks in general, so I just printed this whole thing in red. But as you can see, and I included a thing for. And I have an option to not have this as well for the hose that goes from your oil filler breather over here. So the stock one. So that's kind of what that it looks like, and just kind of curious if people are interested in that kind of stuff. I mean, the IDF and the IDA stuff. I actually have an engine builder out in California testing an IDA version of the velocity stacks, which kind of look like this right here. That's not the ones I sent them. Those are just test prints for fitting, but they flow. They've been airflow tested on a flow bench, and they flow significantly better than what comes with the IDAs. And the same thing for these IDF version of or DRLA if you have Delortos. This to this flows considerably more than this. In fact, when I put these on my test engine, I had to change it's an EFI engine. I had to change the fuel table because the airflow is higher, and it leaned out the mixture too much. So, and it wouldn't idle. It wouldn't idle at first. So until I changed the airflow mixture. So I have that stuff ready as well. So if you or in development as well, if that interests you, especially knowing like people that maybe run the dual Soluxes, or even just somebody, maybe you're in a racing class that requires the stock carburetor, and maybe you're interested in this kind of thing for a racing class. These things don't cost me much to produce. They're fairly simple parts, and just like the velocity rings are fairly straightforward. The velocity rings are straightforward on my fan shroud and on the early VW fan shroud and even the Porsche 356 912 fan shrouds. But the doghouse fan shroud is a little complicated, as it has a lot of complications in the back. And the aftermarket fan shrouds that are doghouse are really fun to deal with from a product design perspective, because they just, again, their dimensions are wacky. Compared to OEM. So, but those are all in development and ready to, kind of ready for kind of feedback. Are you guys interested in that kind of stuff? I mean, I know, in terms of IDF and IDA stuff, I think there's probably interest there, but I'm more curious about interest, for something like dual Soluxes, single carburetor setups, like OEM type of setups. Not just because you're running maybe a stock or near stock engine, but perhaps because you're in a restricted racing class, of some kind, and maybe it's not even a 34 PICT3 or a 34 Solex, maybe it's a 30 or whatever. So just let me know in the comments if that interests you, and because I've spent time kind of designing and prototyping, just kind of making sure things fit, since I had one of these carburetors laying around for other reasons, so I might as well just like try it and see. And of course I've got IDF throttle bodies, and I've got an IDA carburetor here to do test fitting and airflow testing with. So so if that's interesting to you, let me know. If it seems like there's some demand, I might produce those. They'll be 3D printed, just like the velocity rings are, using the same material. They'll hold up great. There won't be any problems with those. And I've been running some 3D printed test ones on my test engine for a long time, because I actually started designing the IDF ones probably 2 years ago. I just had lots of other things to do and get done that I was working on that were more important. So, but now I'm reaching the solution for this problem, and so now I'm starting to think more ahead, which will be great. So let me know in the comments, and I appreciate that. And thank you again, everyone that's pre-ordered the Evolution 1 cooling fan and the related products. Really appreciate it. It's been super helpful. So thanks, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.